Since you're here, I don't need to tell you, but there is quite a lot of turmoil and trepidation in the land. In just 130 days in his second term as president, Donald Trump has sought to dramatically increase his own power and use it to reward friends, punish enemies, and enrich himself. It's a harrowing list, and he's just getting started, but he's aimed to eviscerate the federal workforce, commandeer broad sectors of civil society, such as media, law firms, and universities, wipe out independent agencies, defeat judicial oversight, impose on-again, off-again tariffs that have roiled the markets and ravaged people's savings, and pursue inhumane policies with respect to our immigrant community. So that tsunami of activity has been combined with a real sense, I think, of frustration because Republicans in Congress have been in lockstep with the president, and the Democrats have seemed hard-pressed to mount any sort of counter-punch. That is, until 7 p.m. on Monday, March 31st, when Senator Cory Booker rose in the Senate well to speak, saying, "I rise tonight because I believe sincerely that our country is in crisis. Unnecessary hardships are being borne by Americans of all backgrounds." And he didn't yield the floor, as everyone knows, until 8:05 on Tuesday, April 1st, the longest Senate speech in history. The senator's gesture was really a clinic in the creative use of minority power to stem a political tide. His ingenuity, his statesmanship, his sheer stamina delivered the first, it seems to me, real shot in the arm for people wanting to draw attention to the president's abuses and fight back in the court of public opinion. So, doesn't begin to summarize Senator Booker's remarkable resume, but some of that will come out as we talk. By the way, I've gotten some questions from people here, and we've integrated them into the talk. You may recognize them. But I know very well you've come to hear him, not me. So please join me in welcoming the senior senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker. Thanks for coming, man.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. It is so good to be in San Diego. Thank you very, very much. Come on, let's sit down. Let's get talking.
Let's talk. So I wanted to start maybe with the first act of Cory Booker that many of us heard about after earning degrees from Stanford, Oxford, Yale Law School, and the path was ahead of you for a more sort of lucrative lifestyle. In 1998, just after graduating Yale, you chose to move into a low-income housing complex in Newark's Brick Towers. You were on the 16th floor when the elevator was broken. You walked up. When the pipes were froze, you carried water upstairs so that you could bathe. And you're still the only senator, by the way, who lives in an impoverished neighborhood with the average income where the senator lives is under $20,000. I just wanted to ask you, for starters, why you chose to live in Brick Towers.
First of all, it's so good to be here again. I'm so happy you started with a lot of what motivated me. My desire was not to get into politics, to be honest with you. I had parents who were not impressed with all of these degrees. My dad said when I graduated from Yale, he's like, "Boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot." Life ain't about the degrees you get, it's about the service you give. And my parents really raised me to understand, as a Black kid growing up in a affluent all-white environment, after having parents, especially my father, who grew up in deep poverty. He said, "Son, you drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that you didn't dig. You eat lavishly from banquet tables prepared for you by your ancestors. You sit under the shade of trees that you didn't plant or cultivate. You have to prove worthy of the abundance of blessings you can't pay back to these people. You have to pay it forward. And so my brother and I, being raised in this household, we began to realize that the definition of success that my parents were looking for was seen in how much you were doing to continue to be in service, to be in the cause of our country. I give my mom a lot of credit. Like when I was in law school, I started law school not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, and my mom was doing what mothers I think should do, which is annoy the heck out of their kids. Because she kept asking me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do after law school? You need a plan. You need a plan. I'm like, leave me alone, Mom. And then one day she asked me this question, which was, now literally this question sits on my Senate desk. It was one of the most profound, life-changing questions I ever got asked by my mom, who I thought I'd heard everything I needed to hear from her by the time I was 14. But here I was in my early 20s, and my mom asked me this question. She goes, I can see you're stressed. I can see it's triggering for you to ask me what you're going to do. So let's take a different approach, is sort of what she said. She goes, son, tell me what you would do if you knew you couldn't fail. If you knew you were going to be successful, what would you do? And she goes, you don't have to answer me now. I want you to think about it. And so I didn't have an answer. So what the exercise I decided to do as a kid in his mid-20s was to write a list of the people that inspired me most in America. And the list had people that some of you know, like Marion Wright Edelman. She's the Children's Defense Fund. I thought they were doing extraordinary things. There was another guy that then wasn't that famous, but I was so compelled by him. His name is Brian Stevenson. And I
was just here, actually, with Steve Dinkin in the Conflict Resolution Center. Amazing.
And I called these people up. I called their offices and asked them, can I shadow you for a day? And amazingly, all of them said yes, or most of them said yes. And the one person that blew me away the most is a man that most of you probably don't know. His name is Jeffrey Canada. He got a MacArthur Genius Grant. And what he did with his life, if you read his small little book, which I just reread as a senator, it's still so compelling, called Fist, Stick, Knife, Gun, is that he decided to move into the most dangerous neighborhood he could find in Harlem. And he started something called the Harlem Children's Zone. And when I read his book, he let me shadow him for a while, I knew if I couldn't fail, I would start something like this in Newark, New Jersey. And I did just like him. I moved into the neighborhood that people in Newark told me not to move to, that had a tough reputation. But this is the beautiful thing about life. I always say that I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark. And I'll end with this. I get to the city with this high regard for myself and probably too much of a savior complex. And there's an old saying that when you come to the end of all the light you know and you're about to step into darkness, faith is knowing one of two things will happen. Either you'll find solid ground underneath you, or the universe will send you people that will teach you to fly. And one of the first sort of flight instructors I found was this tough as nails, 5 feet tall, African-American woman who was a tenant president of these tough projects. I show up on her doorstep saying, hi, ma'am, I'm from Yale Law School. I'm here to help you. And she looked at me correctly as if I needed help. And she took me to the Martin Luther King Boulevard. As you said, I still live in this neighborhood. And she said, describe my neighborhood. And I described the crack house and I described all the problems that I saw, all the challenges. And she said, you can't help me. And what do you mean? She goes, you can't help me. And she started walking away. And I ran after her, grabbed her from behind very respectfully. And I said, what do you mean I can't help you? And she turns around and says something to me so powerful. She goes, boy, you need to understand this, that the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of these people who looks at my neighborhood and all you see is problems, darkness, and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, possibility, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can help me. And she walked away, leaving me there thinking to myself, okay, grasshopper, thus ended the lesson. But that began my career. I started going with her, sitting with her. I eventually became her lawyer. We sued the slumlord that was running the projects. He eventually got convicted in federal court. And she changed my life when she called me to a tenant meeting one day and said, the city government is corrupt. We're going to run somebody to take on the city government. And I said, great, I'm happy to help. She goes, no, you don't understand. You're the guy. And I'm like, I've only been here like a year. I can't do this. This is not what I want to do. And she just said to me, why are you here? Are you here to help the community? If you are, then you'll listen to the community. This is what we need. And suddenly I went from being a nonprofit leader to starting my career in elected office.
And it was actually a little lesson in exercising minority power, because at first you encountered a kind of machine in Mayor Sharp who actually, beat you one time, and then you were able to sort of turn people around. It's such a beautiful story. I want to stay with it just a little bit more, because you've said, you do come in, you're the totally, well-polished Yale, Stanford, Rhodes Scholar. And I want to quote you. You said, as soon as people know that you're for real, that you're not just here to do sociology, beautifully put, I think, you're about helping people, there's the most incredible embrace. So if you could just embellish a little bit and tell us when you knew that you were embraced by this woman and the good people there, as somebody there to do constructive work that they trusted.
Yeah, Ms. Jones literally said, people have come into our community to study, these quote unquote pathologies and write their papers and publish their articles. She wanted to know, was I there for real? Was I there to be a part of the community? Not to lead the community, not to write about the community, but are you here to be a part of our community? And I said, absolutely. And so the first thing I did for weeks was just sit with her. And that's when I saw what real leadership is about, which is not a title or a position. It is action and example. She was this extraordinary leader who people used to line up or come see her for all kind of issues. One of their kids got in trouble with the law. Somebody was facing an eviction. Someone needed a job. There's a wonderful quote in this beautiful book called In Search of My Mother's Garden. And it says, the real revolutionary is always concerned with the least glamorous stuff. Raising a child's reading level from 4th grade to 5th, filling out food stamp forms for folks because people have to eat, revolution or not. The real revolutionary is always close enough to the people to be there for them when they're needed. Brian Stevenson talks about proximity. How do we live our lives where we're so divided from each other and divided from the urgencies? There was an incredible young man, Strident, who came up to me before, I looked at him and I said, you're the strength we need, but challenged me. Why did you vote for this? Shouldn't you be blocking everything with the Trump administration? And my point is, absolutely. I'm going to stand stridently against someone who I think is a threat to our democracy. But occasionally, I'm going to take steps because the people in my community who I live with, when I go home and have to answer for, they often joke with me in my neighborhood still, where there's a street named after Miss Jones, there's new parks and new housing and new schools that teach so well that we knew there's a change in Newark when the population for 60 years had been declining. Now people are coming back in for the schools. And thank you.
It didn't hurt that someone convinced Mark Zuckerberg to give $100 million, so that's a more complicated story.
That's a more complicated story, but the point I'm trying to drive home is every day I go home in a way that no other senator does to have a simple measure. Is the work that I'm doing making a difference for people in our community who love America so much, but deal with generational challenges that still visit upon my community, from environmental injustices all the way to the systemic racism of the past. And so the community, literally, Ms. Jones said to me when I got elected to the city council seat that people often get put in these high positions and forget where they came from, forget the people that elected them. And she said, I need you to stay grounded in the community. And that's when I said to her in 1998 that I will honor that request by moving into these projects that were notorious for no heat, roaches and other vermin, and elevators didn't work. I said, I will move into the community. And I want to tell everybody here, I've lived in some incredible places in my 50 plus years, but still to this day, the tightest knit, the most caring, compassionate community of people that were so invested in each other in a way that I felt like puts a reality to what John Lewis and others talked about as calling it the beloved community. this still was one of the most special places I've lived that truly was the manifestation of a beloved community, even though we had all these physical challenges to our building. And so I will tell you this right now, and we all know it when we meet people. Are they real or are they not? Are they looking past me to who else might be walking in them that's got more money, more power? We all can feel it. There's something powerful about authenticity, and there's no BS in my community about me. I'm jogging, people roll down their windows, gaining weight, Mayor. And I'm like, I'm not your mayor, I'm your senator. And forgive me, this is a stressful time. I gotta eat I hang out with my two best friends, Ben and Jerry, at night. But a lot of the reasons why, I'll be honest with you, this is the gift of my community and frankly my state, is when Trump administration started, and by 2 months into it, all these horrible things were happening, as we know, but it was people in New Jersey and in particular in Newark that would not accept from me that we didn't have the power to do things. I would tell people, well, why is this happening? And I was like, well, we don't have the votes, I would say. Why is this happening? Well, we're in the minority in the House. And then I still remember a person said to me in my supermarket runs, for any local leaders here, you know, it takes you an hour longer in the supermarket. So many people want to come up to you. I still remember a person said, Cory, you're making excuses. Are you an American or an Americant? And then they said to me, where is this guy that I voted for city council that did a 10-day hunger strike in the projects to bring people's attention to the problem, and we solved a lot of problems? Where's this guy that I voted for that when things were dangerous, you moved into a Winnebago and parked it on the 10 most violent corners in our city? Where's this guy that when crime was a problem, you spent the days serving as our mayor, but the nights patrolling streets with people, engaging with our young people, helping them get jobs and opportunity? Where's the guy? Where's that guy? Why are you being a senator? We want you to be the leader that we elected. And it was that unrelenting sense of demand from my constituents in New Jersey, from the people that knew me, that had me call my staff together in February, March and say, we're not doing enough. We need to think more creatively. We need to get back to the roots of how we started in politics, which was seeing implacable resistance. I mean, you mentioned the mayor that I lost to. I'm telling you right now, first of all, if you're in politics and you have a spectacular failure in life, to the young people here, if you have a spectacular failure in life, have a documentary team there to capture it. Because my first terrible loss was captured in a movie that got nominated for an Oscar, won the Tribeca Film Festival, but then lost in the Oscars to a horrible movie called March of the Damn Penguins. I mean, they're flightless rodents. I mean, they're not cute. I'm cuter than the penguins.
You still haven't gotten over that.
I still haven't gotten over. I'm bitter. I am bitter. But the reality is, just because someone has political power, just because someone has financial power, we still live in a democracy where the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And in my days in Newark, we understood that, and we found ways to make change.
And this is really the perfect segue to the big speech, including your constituents, because as you've explained it, Senator, it was a response to your constituents who were frustrated, not just at Trump's authoritarian moves, but also the Democrats' seeming passivity. And so they were screaming, take risks, do something. We don't feel like you're doing enough. And in your words, you said, you know, people want to know you give a shit. And so can you tell us a little bit more about just the genesis of the speech? Because it really is constituent-driven. It's, as you say, it was thinking out of the box. It's been kind of a phenomenal success, more than you expected. 300,000 people watched it live streaming. So how did you come from getting really wailed on by your constituents to actually standing up in the well on that day?
Yeah, look, I have a benefit in my career that whether it's in Newark or Cape May, whether it's in California, that often people will recognize me. And one of the beauties of my life is that I just had this in a subway this morning. I went out to get a salad, and a guy from Oklahoma comes up to me and sees me. I often think people should give me Mother's Day cards, because sometimes people look at me and say, you mother. The reason why I love the job I have is because so many people will be very strident at you, or they'll do something that's more incredible to me, which is an essential necessity to building community, essential necessity to making connection, a necessity to shrink the distance between us and them to the goal we should have, which is just us. And that's when people come up to you that are willing to be vulnerable, to tell their story, to tell their hurt, to tell their pain. Brené Brown says it the best when she talks about the only real pathway to strength and courage is through vulnerability. And so I have this job where people will come up to me and give me a piece of their mind, so much so I should be like Einstein by now. I've gotten so many pieces of minds. But the reality is, what I'm really moved is when people tell me their stories. And so leading up to this, our office in the Senate became this outpost where people, and I told my staff when I was trying to do the caretaking of my team, and I said to my staff, I know we start every week brokenhearted, and by Friday we're shattered because people are coming to us and telling their stories, showing their vulnerability, and it's hurt that often you can't help with in the immediacy. And we are not just an outpost for people in New Jersey. We get people from states that often don't have Democrats. So I had farmers from Texas who were relying on programs that I supported to create more regenerative farming, bought the equipment, and now suddenly their grant is being frozen and their farm is in jeopardy. Or USAID workers who I stood with on the Sudan-Chad border, where literally the horrors of that crisis, you could take Syria and the horrors there, Gaza, the horrors there, you could take Ukraine and the horrors there. More people are dying a day than all three of those combined in Sudan. And then suddenly you're home in New Jersey or DC, and you hear from those aid workers that their cell phones were cut off, their laptops cut off, they couldn't get their email, and they were ordered to leave knowing that when they left, babies would die. You hear from people on the front lines of infectious diseases, fighting infectious diseases like treatment-resistant tuberculosis or Ebola, putting their lives at risk, and suddenly they have the same thing. Their government tells them, come home now. If you stay, you're violating the directives of the United States government. And they know they're not just protecting people in that nation, but they're protecting us because an infectious disease anywhere is a threat to public health anywhere. So day after day, hundreds of people have been reaching out to your office, calling for you, and you are frustrated. I have the best team that works around the clock, but yet we felt like we weren't getting there, but we knew that the solution to the crisis that we're in is for us to understand that we all have agency, but if we just are sitting on our couches in a state of sedentary agitation and not getting up and doing something about it, then they'll prevail. And so my team started doing this brainstorming. What can we do to lead in this time? We may not have political power or financial power, but or the right position or be in the minority, but this is a moment where we need to deal with the first problem, which is a problem of poverty, not material poverty. The greatest poverty in America is not material poverty. It's a poverty of empathy, a poverty of compassion. There is not a problem. There is literally not a problem in this country that we can't solve. In fact, there's not a problem in this country that somebody somewhere on the planet Earth has already figured out how to solve. But for some reason, we are stuck in this sclerotic inaction. And so what could we do? And so we said something that had been bothering me for more than a decade when I got to the Senate and learned that the longest speech had been a segregationist, a white supremacist, a guy named Strom Thurmond. And so I began to talk to my staff about saying, well, what if we make a valiant effort and take control of the floor and see if we can break this record of this segregationist, and maybe in doing it, we could center those stories of constituents. And if we break through, people will be forced to confront the truth that's happening in America, which is Americans are hurting and struggling and suffering and afraid. And if we can read those constituent letters and do it in an inclusive way, because if you are contributing to the rank partisanship, the tribalism of this country, you're undermining our ability to solve the tribalism of this country, because we were so retreated into our and they've done studies like this where they poll Americans and say, here's an idea that's a Democratic idea, and boom, 80% of Republicans are against it without even knowing the policy details. But the same thing on the other side. If you hear it's a Republican idea, boom, 80% of Democrats are against it, not even knowing what the idea is or understanding it. We thought if we could center people and tell their stories, some of them will be Republicans, some of them will be Democrats, but this is not a right or left moment in America. It is a right or wrong moment in America. And we want to call to the conscience of our country. I'm tired of doing interviews. I did Jimmy Kimmel last night, and in the pre-interview, they said, here's a question he might want to ask. So happy he didn't ask it, which was, what are Democrats going to do? The party's got 25% approval rating. Cockroaches have higher approval rating, and colonoscopies have higher approval rating. You know, like why are you, like, what are you going to do about the Democratic Party? And my response to that always is, I'm not going to do about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party will do better not caring about the party and start caring more about people. And if people believe that the Democratic Party has their back, my grandfather was born a Republican. The reason why he switched to becoming a Democrat, as most blacks were Republicans at that time, wasn't because of a party or a brand. They switched because FDR was about the people. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, workers' rights, the civil rights, these were things that were about the issues that meant something to my grandfather as an assembly line worker at a Ford Motor plant was about. And so my team and I said, let's try to center the voices of people, do it in an inclusive way. We read from Republican think tanks and conservative think tanks and Republican governors and the voices of all people who were speaking to the wrongness of the actions of the president. And so we thought if we can do that, if we could hold the floor for a long time, like my staff was smart. Don't tell people you want to break the record. You know, we learned this when I was mayor. Under promise, over deliver. But so just get up and say that you're going to hold the floor as long as physically possible. And then maybe 5 hours in, 10 hours in, 15 hours in, people will start tuning in and say, is this guy going to do this? Is he going to go? And we knew that the press would start telling people that the goal was 24 hours. And
breaking
maybe
the record here.
Yeah, and maybe that last 5 or 6 hours. And so we didn't know if it was going to be a flop or not. And be honest with you, one of my friends in the Senate, who after the Pulse shooting, when we were getting the same thing to Democrats in the minority, Mitch McConnell controlled the floor. He was the leader at the time. After the Pulse shooting, people were saying to us as Democrats, do something, do something, do something. And our response, not only do we not have the ability to sort of control the floor, bring bills to the floor, we also don't have the 60 votes. Even if we had the majority, we didn't have 60 votes. But that wasn't enough. And so he generously wrote this in his book. But I started talking to Chris Murphy and saying, here you are from Connecticut where Newtown happened. You are such a powerful moral voice. Do a filibuster. And he said, I'm going to do it. So we plotted. And I said, in solidarity with you, Chris, I'm going to stand with you the whole time. I won't leave the floor. I won't go to the bathroom. And it lasted 15 hours until Mitch McConnell agreed to give us a vote on a bill. The vote failed. We didn't have the 60 votes, but it was a triumphant moment. And it was also information for me that I could stand for 15 hours, that I could not go to the bathroom for 15 hours, which was for a guy who gets up 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night. I was pretty impressed. Chris and I were impressed with ourselves. And so this was...
He walks the whole state every year, right? He really deserves...
He's walking it now if
assist.
you tune into his social media.
We'll have him out here.
Yeah, he's a really special guy. And but this was the interesting thing for me was that, like, okay, we could go 15 hours. Now, when I told Chris Murphy, because he agreed immediately, I'll be your wingman on the floor like you were mine. But I want to remind you, Cory, we're 10 years older. And I also want to remind you, Cory, you're like 40, 50 pounds heavier. and so standing for that long was my fear. So we knew we needed to do this differently. We knew it was a moment, and we said, okay, let's prepare in 3 ways. The first way for me was the physical preparation. And I said, if I'm going to not have to go to the bathroom, I said, let me fast for 3 days. And for anybody who's read books on longevity, there's a powerful thing that happens to the body when you burn through all the glycogen in your liver and you go into ketosis. It's actually a different kind of energy, and you get like a lot more energy. And so I knew fasting. I'm a guy that does intermittent fasting, but the not having to go, number one, to not give you guys too much bathroom data was the bigger hack I had to figure out how to do. And so I dehydrated myself for a day by not drinking any water. But that created a whole host of other physical problems, which is like numbness, cramping, and a lot of my muscles were cramping up in my hands. But that was a physical prep. The second thing was the centering of American stories. So we prepared over 1,000 pages. My staff was amazing, drawing, as I said, from universal principles and virtues of our nation, things that would bring people together so that this wouldn't look like a rank partisan stunt. And it was really focusing on voices that don't get heard from the Senate floor enough. And then the third thing I just have to say is, when it comes to religion, I'm one of these people that believes before you tell me about your religion, first show it to me in how you treat other people. Before you tell me about how much you love your God, show me and how much you love his children. Before you show me your passion for your faith, show me your compassion for others. Like we live in, and forgive me because I should be more generous, but I have very little patience for religious hypocrisy. But faith is important to me. I really tell Democrats all the time, like, don't make the American flag or belief in God only a Republican thing. Like, love this country, be a patriot. My parents used to talk about black Civil War soldiers that carried that flag, died for that flag. Like, honor the traditions of this country. And as Langston Hughes said, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. Raise a flag in that area, and then talk about your faith, because faith conversations are urgently needed in this country. And so the third way I prepped was really connecting to what I think is a larger spirit, because I knew the body has limitations, but the spirit has none. And so I had a prayer circle. I had the last moment, she brought tears to my eyes, Lisa Blunt Rochester, the third black woman ever to serve in the United States Senate history, literally came over to where I was sitting and prayed with me the night before. The guy who has more titles than this library, Reverend Dr. Senator Warnock, and I just called each other and prayed together, and then we were off. And we did not know that TikTok told us during the time they're going to try to check, but they think that getting 350 million likes in the middle of likes, not views, might have been a record. We had no idea it would break through in that much, and that literally that next day we would win in Wisconsin. There would be Americans taking to the streets and to marches, coast to coast, cities all over the place, and that we would see signs. I'm here because Cory sent me. So we knew we hit some kind of great nerve, and that's when you know it's not about us. But it's about putting yourself in a position where I would call it the universe can use you for a purpose greater than yourself. And that's I think one of the great things we've seen in American history about people taking a risk, about stepping up and knowing again that they'll find solid ground underneath you, or the universe would send you people, in this case, millions of Americans that will give you the energy and the spirit to fly.
Remarkable story. There'll be books about this. In fact, word on the street is you may be writing one, but it's been obviously such an electric moment at a time when electricity was really wanting. So another round of applause, please. think a little darker for a few minutes, though, because I do want to focus on the obstacles that you were able to burst through, maybe setting an example. But you yourself have remarked about your own frustration at the sort of quiescence of both political actors and citizens. But certainly one thing you did was vault over the whole kind of tiresome parliamentary maneuvers that weren't getting anywhere in the party. I just want to ask you, because you mentioned it even in your response, it's perplexing and frustrating. Crazy shit is happening.
Yeah.
That's
a political science term to the young people.
Yeah, exactly. How do you account for the very large levels of indifference in the country? Is it people are just going to work and not thinking about it? People are afraid. They just don't. What is keeping people generally from speaking out? What's the general force that you're trying to sort of jumpstart?
So, look, I want to be clear. In the frustration, fear, anger, overwhelm, I could go through it all. There has not been a period in American history where citizenry at large has not felt those feelings and their emotions. John Meacham, the historian, has said to me a lot over the last 4 years that nothing we're experiencing is unprecedented. It all has precedent. And so I know, again, from sitting at the feet of my elders about periods of American history that were wretched and are dark. But in every one of those moments, people were able to hit frustration and discouragement over and over again and not lose their conviction. And this is one of those times. There's no magic switch to flip. People have said to me, what did you accomplish in your speech? And I'm saying that this is not like suddenly you punch a door and it'll fall over. This is us having to go at it over and over and over again collectively to be able to make a difference. And I talked to some incredible women in purple shirts here, and I looked at them and I know you have to continue to fight, but I said to them, don't underestimate what you do, the change you make just by standing up. You may not even understand it in the immediate context of right now, but you are making more of a difference than you know, and that what the opposition wants to do is to overwhelm you and make you so discouraged that you don't get off the couch. And the story I tell people all the time, which is such a powerful illustration of just right now, somebody in this room, it would be the greatest gift to me is if you came here and then left here and decided that, you know what, I can do a little bit more. I can maybe write a $25 check to Planned Parenthood. I can maybe write a $10 check to this group here that does immigration law, nonprofit. I can volunteer a little bit more. And the reason why I tell you that is because of this. In 1965, on March 7th, there was a white guy on a couch in New Jersey watching TV. And if you're near a young person right now, maybe put your arm around them because it's hard to understand the hardships of those times that we only had 3 channels. It sounds horrible, terrifying. But the benefit back then, people were in much better shape because you had to actually get up and go to that TV and not only change the channel, but when you changed it, then you had to wrestle with the coat hanger on the top. So a lot more physical activity in those days. So this white guy, years before I'm born, is watching TV, a movie called Judgment at Nuremberg, and then they break away on that date. Some of you who are savvy historians knew that date, something profoundly awful happened in this country called Bloody Sunday. They go off of the TVs and now they're showing a bridge in Alabama named for a grand wizard of the KKK, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. These marchers for voting rights are marching over that bridge, stopped by Alabama state troopers. And then they literally, the man at the head told me, they realized they couldn't go forward. So they decided to turn around and pray first. But before they can kneel and pray, tear gas shot at them, men on horseback charging and trampling them, men with billy clubs and gas masks pounding their skulls. The man on the front of it is named John Lewis, had his head cracked open, bled that bridge red. What's the white guy on the couch do? Remember, 1965, church bombings, murders, assassinations. It's a horribly dark period in America. And this white guy on a couch in Jersey gets up and says, I got to go to Alabama. But then he instantly realizes he just started his law firm, put a lot of money into it, can't even afford a plane ticket to Alabama, so he slumps back into a couch. What's one human being going to do in the cause of our country? But he does not let his inability to do everything undermine his determination to do something. He does a great American tradition, best he can with what he has, where he is. And so he does a calculation that some might find meager, which is I could afford in an entire week just one more hour of pro bono work, and I don't do anything in this space. So he said, I'm going to do an hour of legal work in the civil rights era here in New Jersey, calls around, finds this young woman who happens to be head of something new called the New Jersey Fair Housing Council. And amazingly, she says, I need a lawyer because we can't figure out how so many of the best neighborhoods with the greatest public schools just won't let black people move in. And so he goes, I'm going to help you. And he starts coming up. He had found out other places in the country, they were doing sting operations where they'd send black couples out to look at a house. They would be told the house was sold. The white couple would come volunteering after them and find out the house was still for sale. And so they started doing it. He kept giving them legal advice. They got really good at it. And then years later, 1969, this black family was so frustrated. Every place they looked at it in white communities, they were told the house was sold or pulled off the market. And so they started working with him. He gave the case file to the Fair Housing Council. Amazingly, the head of the Fair Housing Council said, we found this great neighborhood for them with great houses. And by the way, I interviewed the head of the Fair Housing Council from the 1960s. She's easy to find because she's 94 years old and still the head of the Fair Housing Council in New Jersey at 94. But she said they sent the black couple to look at the house. The black couple fell in love with the house. Then they were told it was sold. They leave. White couple comes. It's still for sale. White couple puts a bid on the house for the black couple. Bid is accepted. Papers were drawn up. And on the day of the closing, the white couple did not show up at the real estate agent's office.
There's a punchline here.
The black man did. And the lawyer, Marty Friedman, walk in. And the real estate agent, realizing he's been caught, doesn't give up, stands up and punches Marty Friedman in the face, sigs a Doberman pinscher on the black man. They fight their way out. Then they write letters back and forth, and the owners of the home were horrified at what was happening. They agreed to sell the family, the black family, the house. The black family moves in, integrates an entire section of New Jersey as the first black family, and the baby from that family was just a few months old. 43 years later, goes on to be America's fourth black person ever elected to the United States Senate, me. I am here because one guy on a couch gave an hour more. An hour more. This is that context. This is exactly the same context. And to assume that you don't have the power to change the course of human events, to change the course of our country, belies the truth of our country, that in every context, it wasn't Washington that made the changes. It wasn't. It was small groups of Americans coming together in neighborhoods across this country. It was these small groups of Americans that were terrified. They met in barns, in the woods, and they plotted the greatest infrastructure project this nation has ever seen. It's not the Transcontinental Railroad, it's the Underground Railroad. Small groups of Americans like Alice Paul, frustrated with the lack of progress of the mainstream suffrage movements, her and about 5 other women did something that had never before been done in America. They stand in front of the White House and picket there. They called them the Silent Sentinels because they didn't scream and yell. They held up the actual words of the president they were protesting. 5 women or so. They were so angry at these women. What do they do to strong women? Throw them in jail. Threw them in an insane asylum. They must be insane for standing up and fighting for truth and justice. Before Gandhi, one woman, Alice Paul, went on a hunger strike. shoved tubes down her throat, tortured her, pouring raw eggs down there to try to keep her alive. The press, so important, the Fourth Estate, writes about the story. People are so horrified at her treatment, she comes out. Now public opinion shifts to her, and eventually the President of the United States comes out of the White House and endorses what she's doing. It has always been small groups of courageous Americans against the powers and the authorities, fighting through frustration, fighting through setback, time and time again, that eventually changed this country. Change does not come from Washington. It wasn't a bunch of men that said, hey, fellas, on the Senate floor, hey, fellas, let's give women the right to vote. Ready? Break. No, it wasn't, the Civil Rights Act didn't come because one day Strom Thurmond said, I've seen the light. Give those Negro people the right to vote. No, it has always been Americans like us in this room who have said, I am powerful, I am strong, I may be tired, I may be weak, I may not have money, I may not have title, I may not have position, but I can do something. And I will tell you the best exemplar in my life of this was the woman in the neighborhood I still live in, named Miss Virginia Jones, whose son was murdered in the building I moved into in the 80s. Murdered. I don't know a horror that's greater than that, to have a child murdered. But how many Americans do we know in this room individually who turn their pain into purpose, who turn their trials, the worst trials, into public triumph? And this woman never left those buildings. She was this woman with such a fierce love. She held us all together. I remember asking her, why didn't you move out of these buildings? I knew where she worked. You could live in a lot nicer, safer place. Why do you? And she looks at me like I'm insulted by the question. She goes, why am I still in these buildings? I go, yes, Miss Jones. Why do I still live in apartment 5A? I go, Miss Jones, why am I still the tenant president since these buildings were built in 1969? I'm thinking to myself, that's electoral longevity there. Why? And she looks at me, she goes, because I am in charge of Homeland Security. She didn't need a title, a position, a cabinet post, a presidential appointment. One American stood up for her community, for her neighborhood, for the people in that building. And I still meet people out and about, not just in New Jersey. I meet the Brick Towers diaspora who talk about the power of Miss Jones and the difference that she made in their lives. What you do matters. Every act of good, every act of righteousness, standing up for justice sends out ripples of goodness and possibility into this world that you'll never fully realize. The worst thing you can do is surrender your power, and God bless America. America needs your power now.
Senator, thank you so much again for being with us today. I wanted to end, but you've really set it up here on a more personal note about you. Members of your party are often identified by a series of policy positions you really seem to stand out for, and we've just heard it, your embodiment of a certain spirit and sense of purpose and breadth across party lines. Others see this. Back in 2009, Congressman Cedric Richmond said, you're driven more by faith and purpose than politics. John Podesta, whom we, is a sort of stalwart in government. I think Booker has the capacity to project into the future with a kind of moral commitment that excites people, and that's completely believable. So in our remaining minutes, except they are short, I'm going to call an audible here. I wanted to talk about this purpose-driven part of you as a person and politician. But first, are you ready for a lightning round?
Yeah, I love a lightning round.
Talking Feds is supported by the Brennan Center for Justice. In this new political era, the Brennan Center will do what they do best: defend the Constitution and the rule of law. They're prepared to fight against presidential overreach and will continue advocating for reforms to resist weaponized government, stop billionaires from corrupting our elections, and ensure every eligible American has the freedom to vote. Stay informed by visiting BrennanCenter.org.
I just did a podcast called The Shade Room yesterday. She got very personal about my dating life, so I hope you're not going to go there. But go ahead.
No dating life questions.
Okay, thank God.
10 questions, and here we go.
All right.
You don't tear.
10 questions in the time that sand
I
is.
think so.
Okay, let's go for it.
All right. If you weren't a politician, you would be?
A leader of a nonprofit, I hope.
Best Star Wars movie.
The original, 1976.
If for one day you gave up being vegan, what would you eat first?
I'd go to a New Jersey diner and have a tuna melt.
A TV show you binged.
So many. I'm a little bit addicted. I love superheroes. I love Invincible.
One answer, please.
Invincible.
Invincible. All right. Most people who don't live in Newark don't understand about it is.
It was on the front page of Harper's Magazine in the 1940s as the most livable city in America. And one of the things they highlighted they called it a cultural center for the country. If you know jazz, Newark was one of the jazz capitals of America.
A book that changed your life?
The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin.
If you were a pro boxer, what would your walk-on song be?
Oh, wow. It would be maybe Sly and the Family Stone, Stand.
I love this guy. Thank you for letting me be myself again, Senator.
Yes.
True or false? AI will be a boon for mankind.
True.
Describe your teenage self in 3 words.
Awkward, braces, awkward.
And your favorite Southern California city near the Mexico border?
San Diego!
All right. Again, thank you so much for being here. I want to have, on the last question, I want to quote Cory Booker, who said, "This is a time when America needs moral leadership and not political leadership." And that's what I'm standing up and saying. I'm accepting responsibility for my own leadership failings. I want to appeal to the soul, the heart, the conscience of our country. It's not just important for leaders now to speak against Trump, but also to capture the imagination of people for how we can rise above this moment. So my question, Senator, is what does moral leadership look like to you in this moment, and how can leaders not only stand against Trump, but actually inspire the country to rise above the division and fears of the Trump era?
So I remind people who study this chapter of American history that when Martin Luther King stood on the March on Washington, and it wasn't just him, it was leaders like Johann Prince, a rabbi from an incredible shul in Newark, New Jersey, who was one of the 5 main speakers. But none of them stood up and gave a list of grievances against Bull Connor or George Wallace. They actually stood up and did something more profound, which is that they called to the moral imagination of the nation. They called us together and articulated a vision that was not polarizing or partisan, that was unifying and uplifting. I pray, as hard as it is, please do not make Donald Trump the main character in this chapter of American history. He is not. I'm in a library and I'm a bibliophile. I love books. And Taylor Branch's, if you're not even going to read the whole book, get Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters and just read the chapter called A Children's Miracle. It doesn't center Bull Connor, who was the villain. It centers children, young people whose creativity changed the nation, the call to the conscience of our country. And what they said, the city that segregation could not be beat. They said that it fell in 12 days because of their creativity. And what I struggle with, and I struggled with it when I ran for president, which is people kept saying, we want a leader that's going to, punch Donald Trump in the face. And I remember running for a town hall stage, and I'm a former tight end from Stanford, and when I get ahead of steam, now that I'm older, it's harder to stop, actually. And so I'm running for a town hall stage, and a guy who looks like a linebacker from Iowa State is there. And he's like, dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I look at him and I go, dude, that's a felony. And then I jump up on the stage and ask him, can I tease you from the stage? He's like, go ahead, man, go ahead. And I said the line, I said, this is the guy just said this to me. And everybody cheered. And I said, no. The first rule I had when I was running in Newark, if you watch the movie Street Fight, 87 minutes, I used to say all the time, we cannot become what we're trying to replace. That this is a moment where we have to be light and not darkness. Now, this doesn't mean you don't fight tough. As a guy who has a movie called Street Fight, you get into the gutter and you work hard and you fight hard and you can win. But you don't have to begin to surrender your virtue. Because to me, this is a time that, as Gandhi said, the means and the ends are the same thing. If we're going to have transformation in America, it's not because we called everybody that voted for Donald Trump an idiot or dumb or what have you. That's just not the truth. It's because just like those civil rights marchers in Birmingham, those children, is they got people that used to be against them and what they're doing to join them together. I would love to tell everybody in this room that the reason why we kept the Affordable Care Act was because somehow I took, John McCain in the other room and berated him so badly that he's like, oh, Cory, I surrender. I will vote against it. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't me or other senators. It was the American people. It was these groups of kids. They called themselves little lobbyists. They were children with disabilities that rolled into there and spoke truth to power. This is one of those moments that needs the best of who we are, not the worst. And for us not to apologize. Yes, it is a scary time. You cannot have a time like this without fear. But remember, fear doesn't define us. You can't have great courage without great fear. Fear is a necessary precondition to courage. It is a time that we should be worried. Worry is rightful and justified. But does the worry debilitate us, or does our worry turn into work? And so I'm going to end with just this simple plea. A simple plea. I wanted to give up on politics in my first year. In my first year, I was done. Because the mayor of the city was doing things that are Trumpian, I would say. He was ticketing my car everywhere I parked. My driver's license was being suspended by the municipal court. All things that are not right. I was being followed around by the police, warned by federal judges that I was in danger. I was getting outvoted 8-1 on the city council. I didn't have the votes. And then this is my favorite. It's funny now. What is it called? Comedy is tragedy plus time. But like I got elected in July and they rigged the heater in my office. So I couldn't turn it off and it just spewed out hot air. In New Jersey in July, it was like 85 degrees outside and 105 in my office. I was done. I suddenly wasn't making change because I didn't have the votes of the council. I was going to quit. And Miss Jones, I will never forget what she did. She stood there, as she always did, in front of Brick Towers. I was coming home because I just wanted to hang out with my two best friends who I told you about already, Ben and Jerry. And Miss Jones looks at me and says, what's wrong with you? I don't have time. Don't you just walk past me, boy. Okay, Miss Jones. She goes, tell Miss Jones what's wrong. And I go, Miss Jones, I should have never listened to you. You ruined my life. I was a great young lawyer representing people. Now I'm an effectual politician. And I complained to her. And I'll never forget what she said. She looks at me and she's like, as if God talked to her. She's like, I know what you should do. And I'm like, thank God, what should I do? And then she repeats it. She goes, yep, I know what you should do. And I go, I heard that the first time. What should I do? And then she crosses her arms and she says, I know exactly what you should do. I go, Miss Jones, I don't have time to play with you. I'm at my wit's end. What should I do? And she looks at me as if God was talking to her. And she said, do something. And I was so angry. I went back to the projects, walked up 10 flights of stairs. But that breaking point for me led to me going to the most dangerous projects in our city, setting up a tent right in the drug dealer's territory, and doing one of my first acts of doing something different as an elected leader, which was a hunger strike. And I said I was going to go without food until we figured out together how to solve this problem. And here's what happened. Thousands of people came out to that when they saw on the news what was happening. Thousands of Americans. We literally had people volunteering, contractors, to go into people's apartments, see what was wrong, and fixed it. People donated computers to the computer learning center. People came out did health screenings, fitted kids with eyeglasses who people were thinking were just stupid or not effective or not paying attention, but they just couldn't see the blackboard. So many problems were being solved because people just came out. This black community became this community representing all the backgrounds, and eventually the mayor of the city, my nemesis at this point, came out to the projects. And I'll never forget what happened. There's a full-page picture in the state's newspaper. After 10 days of fasting and praying, he comes out to the projects expecting a confrontation. It was like a parade up the streets, a police department, fire department. He came out to see me, and I ran to him like the prodigal son and threw my arms around him. We hugged. He looked at me confused. He put away his prepared remarks. And then this man prophesied, who would be my eventual adversary, that I would one day become mayor of the city. And then there was a celebration. And then there was a final prayer, and that's what I want to end with. Because when we did a circle to pray in these projects that most of America had forgotten about, that only paid attention to was when there was a murder, underneath an overpass, 280 in New Jersey, that leads to some of the wealthiest suburbs in America. And now that black community suddenly had a circle of prayer of hundreds of people that looked like America. There were black folks and Asian folks, Latino folks and white folks, and we were all holding hands. And when we prayed, it was a symphony of us. People were praying in Arabic and Hebrew and Spanish and English. And after not eating for 10 days, I am telling you, and I'm a former athlete that could bench like 400 pounds, but the strongest I ever felt in my life up to that point was when I joined hands in that circle and felt the strength and power and heard the symphony of prayer. And for me, I heard the traditions that are in every faith, every ancestral traditions in our country. In the Jewish faith, there's a ki beiti, beit tefillah l'chol ha'amim. It's this aspiration that my house should be a house of prayer for all nations. In the Muslim faith, this ideal of tawhid, that we are oneness before God. In a great man, a Christian minister who said, when he was in a jail cell, wrote the words that we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny. But for the first time in my life, 3 words made sense to me that are the call of a country, that are written in a dead language, that sit in the Senate above the presiding officer. Not God bless America. Not one of our quotes from a great American. Just 3 words that are the hallmark of this country. E pluribus unum. Our call right now is not just to stop Trump from doing bad things, but to resurrect, like James Baldwin, to resurrect, like that Langston Hughes quote I said, the dream of America. We need to redeem the dream and dream America anew. And if our generation can do that, if the new generation coming into leadership in our country as the great baby boomers and civil rights generations now make way, if we can do that, as great as our history of overcoming wretchedness, as great as our history is of light workers who cast away darkness, as great as our history is, if we can do that right now in our moral moment, I promise you that the best days of our nation are still ahead of us. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Miss Jones and Senator Cory Booker. You're unbelievable. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.